myself, but there is an international organization called ASIS, which is an international organization of experts in security. And then there's also an organization called CPTED, which is Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. Now that sounds like a mouthful, but really what CPTED is, it's designing space to support positive human behavior. And I also have a certification in that as well. So we're going to be applying these principles today as we have this conversation. So as we think about this, why do we want to create these positive meeting spaces, and why is that important? Well, first and foremost, we are public servants. And there are times when we hold meetings, and I'm sure many of you have conducted meetings, where there has been opposition and opposing views. Have most of you been in a meeting at one point or another where the public had one view, or maybe the public was in there and you had two different groups of public that had opposing views, and you were left to be referee, right? While it was being held in your building and you had the agenda and you had the gavel, boy, it was probably interesting at times to maintain control and to kind of make sure that everybody's heard. And that's what's so critical about these. We want to promote appropriate behavior, first of all. And we can get into a long discussion about a drop in civility in our society today. I think we would all agree that we're seeing a drop in civility. It's interesting, I do the cooking and grocery shopping in my marriage. My wife and I figured out 32 years ago that I'm a better grocery shopper and a better cook than she is. And I got to tell you, even in grocery stores today, they talk about road rage. We're actually experiencing grocery cart rage now in the aisles. If you've ever stopped to talk to somebody who's maybe you're passing in the aisle, and you get that disgusted person who's practically trying to ram through your carts because instead of just saying, "Excuse me, please." Yeah, we're seeing a reduction in civility today, which that means that translates into our public meetings. Some people simply do not know how to appropriately behave when it comes to a public meeting. I jokingly refer to these people as outdoor cats. And we've got to teach them how to be indoor cats. Okay? That may work in your home, that may work in your neighborhood, but when you come to a public building and you're engaging in a dialogue, which is part of the government process, we need you to behave and to be respectful of the process and to be respectful of other people. We also need to have orderly meetings because it very clearly defines what the roles are, kind of defines what the rules are. And sometimes we can anticipate a rather controversial meeting. Maybe there's a Walmart coming to your community. Maybe there's a beautiful old farm that got sold to a developer, and now he's proposing putting 500 units in, and you've got neighbors coming that live up against that property, right? We have those types of things. Maybe there's a new road being proposed, or a change in speed limit, or how that road's going to be managed. We want to try and mitigate some of these things ahead of time so that the meeting can be a successful and positive meeting, and ultimately so that we can serve the community. We are public servants. We have to remember that. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about how are we going to conduct these regular meetings. And for most of our examples we will use for the purposes of today, we will be talking about a monthly township meeting. Supervisors meeting. Does that sound good? So we're gonna base our discussion on that, but obviously this can apply to zoning or planning or any other type of special meeting that you may call. The full training in this also discusses how to conduct small group meetings, like if you have a particular upset resident coming in, or you have a township employee that you maybe have to discipline or terminate. But we don't really have time to jump into small meetings today, so we're going to focus on the traditional large meeting. Now, words matter. Have any of you figured that out in your public service? Have any of you actually said something that slipped out of your mouth, and as soon as you said it, you thought, whoops, I shouldn't have said that? It's happened to all of us. It's happened to me, and this is my profession, and it has happened to me. Dr. Thompson, who wrote the book Verbal Judo years ago, came up with these two terms to describe two different types of speech: natural speech and strategic speech. Natural speech is that speech which we most comfortably use, and it's often used in our own defense. or to maintain our own ego, okay, or our own self-identity. So if you're sitting in a public meeting and you're just getting barraged with insult after insult, you just got this toxic group that's coming up to the microphone and they're just dumping it on you. You're having one of those nights where they're just throwing it at you. Natural speech wants to every once in a while throw a zinger back out there. You just kind of want to throw another zinger out there, okay? And we need to protect ourselves against doing that, because generally, here's the general rule: if it feels good, you probably need to keep it to yourself. If it feels good, you probably need to keep it to yourself. That's okay if you're with your friends and you're at a party or you're at your house and you're kind of throwing it back and forth with your family members. I don't know about you, but in my family, sarcasm is actually part of our love language. Any of you that way? And I'll tell you, yeah, my wife took years to get used to our family. I always describe my in-laws as the LL Bean family. And they looked like they came out of an LL Bean catalog, and all they spoke was encouraging, wonderful, positive words. My family, if you make a slip up at a Christmas party, that's going to ride you for the next 6 months. And they're going to give you jabs, and boy, once they smell blood in the water, you're done. I mean, the sarcasm is just thick in our family. That's okay to do that in that setting, but not in a public setting. In a public setting, we need to think about strategic speech. Strategic speech has nothing to do with us. It represents the organization. It represents the goals and the outcome of the organization. The easiest way to shift from natural speech to strategic speech is to realize that even if they're pointing their finger at you and saying you, the reality is it's really not about you. You happen to be the name and the face that represents your municipality, and so they're directing it at you, but the reality is you're up there acting on behalf of your municipality. We have to set our egos aside, as hard as that can be, and we need to remember that these people are, while they may be saying you, they're actually speaking to the municipality. That helps us shift and get away from needing to respond to personal insults or digs. And we need to speak strategically. We need to think about our words before they come out of our mouth. Now, sometimes some supervisors and some people on boards choose to not say anything. And you know what? Sometimes silence is good, but then sometimes silence is bad. Because silence creates a vacuum. That now they may think, well, you're apathetic. You're not hearing me. You've already made this decision before we even had this meeting. So it is important, while sometimes we need to measure our words, we also need to respond back to people. And maybe that simply is, thank you very much. I appreciate what you said about, and we will be sure to keep that in mind. If you really think about it, if you or I were to have a conversation, and I was talking to you, and all you did was stare at me, and you never reflected anything back to me, how would I feel about that conversation when it was all done? Did you ever have somebody do that to you? That doesn't feel very good, does it? In fact, it tends to make you angry. It tends to make you anxious. It tends to make you think, well, I guess if they're not going to say anything, they just don't care. We do that same thing sometimes when we sit up there in front of a room and we remain completely silent. So having the ability to express some empathy, some understanding, we can even agree to disagree, is critical when we think about a public meeting. We want to be strategic speakers. Now, in order to empathize with people, the definition of empathy is literally, I need to be able to take away all my biases and all my preconceived ideas, and I need to place myself in that person's shoes and in their circumstance, and I need to, for just a brief time, try to see this the way they see it. And that can be difficult because many times we have a very strong opinion about a certain subject, and it's kind of hard to erase our preconceived ideas or our own conclusions and allow ourselves to think about it through their eyes. I think it's fair to say that for many of us, our regularly scheduled meetings are rather sparsely attended. Is that a fair statement? Yeah. You might get a local reporter that sits down and takes a few notes. You've got that one guy who has nothing else to do and he's retired and he just shows up, right? And then you might even have the crazy guy that shows up. He's there every month, right? Because you have cookies in the back, you know? And really, unless we have a pretty hot topic, a lot of times we're talking to almost an empty room, aren't we? But when we get people that come to a meeting, we have to remember they chose to come to that meeting, they made that a priority, they've got something to say, and they expect to be heard. Because coming to that meeting is an unusual event and it's an extraordinary effort on their part. We have to honor that. If we try to shut people down and we don't let them speak what they need to speak, we are only going to increase their level of displeasure with your board and their level of anger and frustration with whatever that process is. So we need to honor that. We also have to remember that some people come to these meetings with preconceived ideas about you folks. You're out of touch. You're in the pocket of that developer or any of these other ones up here. You don't understand my situation. You live on that side of town. I live over here. They're not proposing to put that in your backyard. They're putting this in my backyard. Okay? Or it's just a good old boys club. It's the same guys on the ballot all the time. And you people just don't understand. So we have to be prepared to understand some of the biases they may have. Occasionally we get people who really organize, right? They start having meetings and they start printing signs and they have a political agenda or they have a political ideology. If we know they're coming to a meeting, we need to consider those things. But we need to understand that for many of them, they're going to come with preconceived ideas about government. And it may not even be specifically about you and your municipality, but maybe they're frustrated with the federal government, the direction it's going in. Maybe they're frustrated with the state government, the direction it's going on. And you guys are yet just another extension of a dysfunctional, in their minds, a dysfunctional, poorly run organization. You're going to have people coming in with those preconceived ideas. So we're not often only dealing with the issue of the night. We are dealing with layers, right? Layers of ideas that they're coming in with. So when you get that dump and they cut loose on you, it is not simply about the stop sign. There's a whole bunch of baggage that comes with that. Okay? And they finally have their moment at the microphone. So let's take a look at some meetings. One of the things that we have to do is we have to clearly define who is in charge. Now, I recognize that among the municipalities, there's probably a broad range of meeting spaces. For years, our municipal building was in a retired elementary school, and we used one of the old classrooms for a meeting space. We had a couple folding tables up front. We had a few folding chairs out for the audience, and that's how we did business. I understand there's municipalities that meet in the fire hall. Then there's municipalities that have a dedicated meeting room and maybe a newer municipality complex where they have a nice podium, kind of similar to what we see here, okay? But as you look at this meeting space, you can pretty clearly tell who's running the meeting. Is that a fair statement? It's the people up front. It's the people on that elevated platform. This is a position of honor. We psychologically consider people that are in these types of settings, subconsciously, we recognize them as being in a position of honor, much like a judge would be in a courtroom, much like if you walk into many police stations, the desk sergeant or the person at the front desk is at a position higher than you are. If you're a speaker on a platform, okay? And it goes back to a very primal thing, and that's called who's in the alpha position. Who's the bigger dog? Who's the bigger bear? Okay? The one who's taller, the one who's bigger. So the fact that these folks, when they're seated, are at this high level, and these folks are on a platform slightly higher, that puts you subconsciously, in their minds, in a position of authority. You're looking down to them. So it's pretty clearly defined who's in a position of authority. How about here? Who's in charge? Rather ambiguous, isn't it? Now, it might feel good, oh, let's have a kumbaya moment here, okay? And we're just going to make a circle so that we're all equal and fair, but who's running the meeting? And the reality is the strongest personality in that circle is going to run that meeting. And if you've got a really outspoken spokesperson for some particular group that's in there, they can quickly dominate over you. So this is not an ideal situation. This might be okay for a forum or a round table or a workshop where you're soliciting public input about a particular thing, but when it comes to your actual meetings, having this type of venue is not an ideal venue, okay? This is interesting. Now, we kind of know who's in charge here, right? Because we have some tables up front. We're at the same eye level as the public, okay? But what have we done here? Look at where this guy's at compared to the board. We've just put that speaker in the alpha position, in the control position. And we're going to talk a little bit later about how to address speakers. But one of the things you want to avoid is having people talk down to you, because subconsciously they now feel empowered. I'm in the control position. You are seated and you are in the subservient position. Okay? So while we often have open mic times and we'll have a podium, it's not ideal to have them looking down at you. And we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that as we get down the road here a little bit. Okay, again, there's our speaker, there's who's in charge of that meeting, the guy standing up at the podium. Here we really don't clearly define any leadership. We're not totally sure who's there. And the reality is that we give people the ability to step into the vacuum of leadership, they will take it and they will end up taking control of your meeting and running with it. So, a few things to remember as we're setting up for these meetings. Tables and chairs and all those types of things to create a front of the room is key. It helps define roles. It also helps define public space from your space. Okay? People would not typically feel comfortable in our society walking around that table and confronting you, right? You wouldn't if you were checking into a hotel and maybe the clerk at the front desk was maybe not checking you in as quickly as you would like. It would not be considered socially acceptable for you to go, that's it, I'm coming around, and you would walk around the counter or hop over the counter to look at that computer terminal. That would be considered a violation of their space, would it not? We would all socially know that, okay? So that table also helps define their space and your space, okay? It's important to remember that. Remember that height determines who's dominant, who's in control, okay? And we need to remember that if we don't define the roles, we're going to create a vacuum. So, for many of us, at some point in our meeting, we open up the microphone for public comment. And this is critical. It is a critical element to any public meeting. It is how we work in our democracy, right? We rely upon the public through their First Amendment right to be able to come to us and address their concerns. Is that a fair statement? We can all agree to that. So how do we do that so that it can be done orderly and be done in a respectful way? One of the things is we can define the scope, okay? And I'm not talking about open mic for something that's not on the agenda. Obviously, many of you in your agendas, you often make some type of statement is, we now have time for public comment for anything not currently on the agenda, right? Most of you provide some opportunity. So we're not necessarily talking about that time. But let's say we're working on a subdivision, and there's clearly an opposition group there. They've got their buttons on, and they all sat together, and they're all wearing the same color shirt, and you can quickly tell that there is a significant group there in opposition of this particular subdivision. One of the things we can do is we can help define the scope. For the purposes of this evening, we are here to talk about the ABC subdivision. We will be providing an opportunity for everybody to come up and speak. First of all, thanks. I'm glad to see that there's a great turnout here. We always thank people. We always want to be a generous host. But you know, it's important tonight that we get to hear from everybody. So first of all, we're going to ask that the comments tonight be limited to the ABC subdivision. You might have one of those chronic protesters that show up, He wants to talk about the subdivision that happened about 5 years ago. He wants to talk about the tree that got cut down in front of his house, okay, the other winter. He wants to talk about the cracked sidewalk down the block, okay. Tonight, we're here to talk about the ABC subdivision. The second thing you can do is you can recommend and you can say, when you come up, we need to know your name and address for the record. And we would like you to, if at all possible, limit your comments to just a few minutes. That way we have the opportunity to hear from everybody. Because we've all had those people that when they get a microphone, holy cow, right? You're looking to pull the plug. You wish you had a shepherd's hook that you could pull them off stage like they used to do in vaudeville, okay? So we can discuss some time limits as well. We can tell them right up front, hey look, we appreciate that this is a very emotional issue, but we're going to ask that you refrain from using any obscenities, okay? And that you not make this personal tonight. We are here to talk about this subdivision. We recognize that you may not have agreed with how the zoning board moved on this matter, that you may not have appreciated some of the decisions that the planning commission recommended to come forward to us, but we would appreciate tonight that you keep this a respectful meeting. So we can set those rules up, okay? Now, here's one of the things I want you to seriously think about. For many of you, you're going to have a microphone that you're going to allow people to use. Sometimes you'll have a floater that hands that microphone, like the microphone I'm talking to now, and you're in a high school auditorium. You have a larger than anticipated crowd, so you moved your meeting, and you've got a guy out there with a microphone and he can hand it off to the public. Bad idea. Because once you hand off the baton, how do you get it back? Right? They're mid-row and you just handed that microphone away. How do I retrieve that microphone? Bad idea. Don't do that. Okay? The second thing we tend to do is we tend to have a microphone on a stand. Now the thing about having a microphone on a stand with a podium is now this person can stand here, okay, and they can be addressing you. And by the way, if you don't have the ability to raise your platform up, you just simply want to put more distance between you and them because that changes the angle. If I'm right on top of you, I'm looking down at you like at a 45-degree angle. That's a very dominant position. But as I move my microphone further back, the impact of my height difference is much different. See the advantage of that? But the problem with having them stand up is, here's what they end up doing, particularly if they have a crowd behind them. Yeah, I said you guys are a bunch of idiots and you're in the pockets of the developer. Right, guys? Right? As we now start turning around and doing this, they're getting energy and we're building drama. The preferred way to manage this situation is to have them come up and sit. See this situation here? Please come up to the table, have a seat, let us know your name and address, and we'll be more than glad to hear your comments. The other thing you do is if you have a microphone stand, they do this in Washington, D.C., by the way, all the time. If you put C-SPAN on and watch a Senate hearing or congressional hearing, somebody's testifying, if you've ever noticed, they're in a chair with arms, and that microphone is way out in front of them. So what do? They have to lean forward like this to talk to the microphone. And if they start turning around and trying to get energy, first of all, they can't really do that, twisting the chair. But secondly, if they start backing away, or if they start looking around, you can simply say, excuse me, I can't hear you. Can you speak into the microphone? And you're keeping them seated, and you're keeping them focused, and you're keeping them forward. That completely deflates the person in terms of their ability to try and dominate the discussion. It gets rid of all that drama. It gets rid. Does everybody have Italians in their life? Yeah. This is a good Italian blocker. Okay? It gets the arms back down. It gets the arms back down. So great strategy if you know you're going to have some controversial people that are coming up to the microphone. Have a folding table there, have a chair, have them have a seat. Okay? Think about that strategy. We need to be gracious hosts. Now, one of the perceptions that you're dealing with is You folks are disconnected from our community. You have been a supervisor for 20 years, okay? You have no idea what this community is like today. You have no idea what my subdivision is like today. You are out of touch. You're a bunch of old white guys. Have some of you heard those types of comments? Some of that banter back and forth? So how do we counter that? How do we become gracious hosts? A couple suggestions. First of all, if you know you're going to have a significant group, you need to have the right size space to meet. If you want to get people agitated and you've got a meeting room that seats 20 and has a window air conditioner that can barely keep it cool enough for you guys to meet, you don't put 40 people in there standing and before you know it, it's 85 degrees in the room. Do you think that's going to elevate the mood or lower the mood? It's going to elevate the mood. And I've heard some township officials say, doggone it, we're not moving. If they want to come, they can come. And I don't care if we have enough chairs, they can stand. That's the wrong attitude. It's the wrong attitude. You need to find the right size room. You need to be able to condition it. You need to be able to provide seating for them. You need to welcome them and thank them for coming out. Okay? You need to be a good host. I would suggest to you that if they have published materials, they are a really well-organized grassroots effort. If you can, talk to their leaders ahead of time. Hey, I understand you guys are coming out to the meeting. You were at the Planning Commission meeting. Oh, you bet we're going to be there. There's going to be more people there than were at the Planning Commission meeting. Well, that's great. We're looking forward to seeing you. Hey, are you going to be bringing some handouts or materials to hand? Oh, you're darn right. We're going to be, everyone who walks through the door is going to. That is great. How about if we have a table in the back of the room for you? Would that help you out? I understand you have a couple posters. Oh yeah, we've got great. You can put those back on that table. Would that be good for you? Will that work for you? Do you need 2 tables? We're killing them with kindness. Right? We're lowering that temperament. And most of all, we have to remember they are our citizens. They are our community. We need to serve them. Creating an adversarial relationship is natural speech. It is not strategic speech. What is your goal? To take care of the business of the township. What is your goal? To have a safe and productive meeting. And if that means I need to maybe move the meeting, or I need to set up a couple folding tables, or make a phone call ahead of time and invite them to bring their materials, instead of having a controversial thing happen that night, why don't we anticipate it? Why don't we plan for it? That's called strategic. That's why they call it strategic speech. Okay? We need to think ahead a little bit. Okay? Let them know right away. You can tell that leader ahead of time. Hey, just so you know, if you're going to be having such a large group, you're probably going to hear our chairman when we gavel in the meeting give a few rules. Do you mind if I go over this with you ahead of time? That way you can let your folks know. One of them is going to be when they come up, we're going to be asking for their name and address. We just do that for our public record. It's a public meeting. And the second thing we're going to ask everybody to do is if they can just limit their comments to just a couple minutes. Because truthfully, we want to hear from everybody who wants to talk. Why not tell them ahead of time? Let them deliver that message to their members. Hey, when you come, you know, that one poster we have that has the finger on it, we're not going to take that poster. Okay? And, oh, by the way, because they want to give all of us a chance to speak, we're going to ask that you guys keep your comments to just a couple minutes. Let them deliver that message to their membership. Okay? Now, what